Hannah, thanks for joining this podcast for my baking journey with Rach and I. This is really interesting for us because I feel like we've got your background and your creative capability and what you do. It's quite drawing. It's quite fascinating for us. Like when we came across you and learned about you and we started digging in a little bit deeper of what you've been doing, it was like, wow, this is what's going on with this. This is really interesting. And I think what's really a nice place for us to start, actually, and we tend to like to do this, is we know you're creative and we know that you're trained as a gemologist and a jewelry designer. I'm going to ask you later what a gemologist is really, so we know. But what I'm really interested to know is going way back to when you were younger. Have you always had this creative bug? And give us some idea, like where did you grow up? What was the family like? Who inspired you to become this creative type? Because we can't piece it together, obviously, from your Instagram. So we need a bit of help. So walk us back a bit and tell us what was going on way back when.
So I grew up in India. Most of my life I lived there, but I'm from a very small town in India. So we didn't have very good schools there. So I went to a boarding school, which was a great experience. So I spent a large part of my life in a boarding school, and I traveled a lot, even beyond that, for college, for university, for courses, and I lived throughout the country and even outside the country. I was in London for 2 years. And so I've traveled a fair bit. And the creative streak, I think, comes, I would say, a little bit from my parents. Yeah, the genetics do play a part there. So my mom is a brilliant cook, and my dad has a very good sense of design. So he designed our home 25 years ago, which still looks amazing and very contemporary, very modern. And so I think, of course, that does play a part in how I have been brought up in a way. And having traveled a fair bit and being exposed to different cultures has really helped me. And I've always had a sense of an intrigue when it comes to different cultures. I love exploring different art forms and what what is different about different cultures. It really intrigues me. And I'm quite a researcher. So I delve deep into things that interested me. And I believe somewhere that's a part to play in your journey. And it's very strange how I got into baking though, because I never baked for most of my childhood because I was in a boarding school and there was not much opportunity to do it. We would come home.
Even with your mum,
Yeah, so
even
she
being
would
this
bake for
cook
us.
and brilliant.
Yeah, she would bake for us. She would cook for us. When you come home on holiday, when you've been away from home for so long, you don't want to step into the kitchen. You don't want to do anything. So we would be pampered in that way. But yeah, so I did bake for the longest time, and it's very strange that I actually graduated in psychology, and I went on to study gemology and jewelry design. And then I had a successful business in jewelry. I had my own brand for about 10 years. And then finally I got into baking. And I think I got into baking because of my kids. My oldest son, he it was his first birthday. And you know how all moms are super excited to bake their kids' cake. And I was like, I have to bake his cake, but I'd never baked in my life. So I started researching. I went on YouTube and I started trying out different recipes. And India was very warm and humid, and I always had trouble. I wanted to come up with the best recipe and make a beautiful cake for my son. So I took on like this mammoth task. I wanted to do like a 7-layer rainbow cake, pinata cake. And it was quite a big thing for me where I hadn't ever baked before. But that's how my whole baking journey started.
We hear that quite often actually about the trigger for a lot of people to get into baking is their kid's birthday cake. So
Yeah.
it is no surprise actually when I hear that sometimes can be that you've never baked, and then all of a sudden if your child's cake, you're like, you want it to be great, you've gone on Pinterest, YouTube. I can make that 7-tier cake. Why not? Right? And like
Yeah.
that's what or seven
Yeah,
layer or seven
actually.
tier. I guess it's 7 layers,
It was
right?
7 layers, yeah, yeah. But it
Sorry,
was huge
7 tiers would
because
be like massive.
I know it was a big deal for me. And I was worried that it's not going to hold up because it was like a 9-inch cake and I'd never done it before. And but to my surprise, it was well appreciated and everybody loved it. So that's how I got into baking for others, so to speak.
Yeah.
You,
So if I go back a bit and go back to your boarding school and those days back in India, was were you encouraged then to be quite artistic? Because I'm just trying to understand this flow, because obviously you went into psychology and then you took a redirection to going into learning more about jewelry and design, etc., and art and a lot more textiles focus. So what was that journey? Were you creative at school, at home, and was it encouraged as well?
It was encouraged, and I think I had a more creative bent of mind, more than numbers and financial stuff. And I was more creative in that way. And I used to play the piano while I was in school, and I used to be interested in art and stuff like that. So I think it started off early in life, and but I didn't know where I was going, to be honest. As a child, you don't know what you're going to do. In fact,
Mm.
even till quite recently, I think I've tried so many different fields just to discover myself because uh,
Mm.
it's self discovery through your entire life. Like for me, it's always been trying out and seeing what interests me. And I was interested in psychology because just I was interested in knowing how people work, how their minds work. But I guess I didn't want to study too much. It was more like I was always being pulled towards the creative aspect. And that's how the shift happened over the years.
so why did you pick jewelry and gemology?
Again, the just interest of gemstones. And I I was very interested in seeing how the phenomenon that goes, how natural stones, they just form. And it's like beautiful things, iridescence and the fire, opal. And, there's so many different natural gemstones which intrigued me. So I just thought of pursuing this as I went to London. I went to the Gemological Institute of America, but the London branch. So I was there for about 2 years where I studied gemology, diamond grading, and then jewelry design. And then I wanted to design jewelry, and it was like I felt people were spending so much money on jewelry. So my forte was to make multifunctional jewelry. So I would design jewelry, which was a bracelet that could be converted into a necklace, that could be converted into earrings, multi-functional stuff that people spend a fortune on, but then they can use in so many different ways. And very interestingly, I have translated that into my recipes that I'm developing now. So we can talk about that later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. But the business, did you start the business immediately after you finished your gemology degree here in London? And then, or did you decide to stay living in London, or did you at that point move back to India? What happened with you personally?
So I went back to India, and that's when my parents invested a little bit of money in the business. I started making smaller pieces. It was all gold and diamond, so it was expensive. But I started doing smaller exhibitions where we had a good network of people. I started designing smaller pieces and exhibiting them. And that's how I generated income and then put it back into, I paid off my parents. And that's how it started. And over the years, I did the business for almost 10 years. I exhibited in bigger hotels in New Delhi and other places as well. So yeah, it was a good phase of my life.
Was it still a passion project for you? How did it work from like financially as well? Because jewelry is custom pieces and some people take time thinking about those
Yeah.
decisions about whether I'm going to buy that or learning more about your story, your background, why I should buy from Henna.
Yeah.
How did that work for you?
So it took time because, of
Yeah.
course, it's a lot of trust, and you need to have a good set up in a way that people can trust you in what you're doing. So my degree helped in that because I knew what I was procuring and what I was getting into, so I could explain it to people well. And of course, it was through word of mouth initially because you need to know people and people need to know you to have that trust in buying something expensive, right? So I started small. I started like really small with smaller pieces where I went on to doing a little more elaborate stuff for weddings and stuff. It was starting from scratch, but then also while I was doing that, to come up with strategies where, because it was a known set of people, I gave them the option that they could pay per month and buy something which they could have it forever, but then they could have an installment sort of a so you have to come up with more creative ways of doing business where people find it easy to believe in you. And because I was there and I was part of the community there, so I could start like that. And then, of course, it took some time. It took me almost like 7, 8 years to build the business to where it was. And but then I eventually decided to give that up. Yeah, that's just the process.
What was it about giving it up? Did you just feel like you've done what you needed to do? Is this your personality where you feel like you master something and then like you move on? Or is it just, I just want something different?
It was more circumstantial because I got married after that and then I had kids. And when my kids were younger, I found it very difficult to travel about, right? Because you had to travel. I had to travel to get my pieces customized and made. So I wasn't, I used to design my pieces. I used to procure the materials and then you had to go to craftsmen who would put them together. So I had to travel a lot, which started getting very difficult for me with a little baby. And so your priorities kind of change. And I continued to do my jewelry when I started baking as well, but it started dying down a bit because you have to I like to put in my all to whatever I'm doing. So I have to give my 100%. So the moment I feel I'm not being able to give my 100%, then I know it's time to take a step back, right?
End of a chapter, right?
Yeah.
So it was almost the arrival of your baby boy was
Yes.
then a bit of a slow close, or brought it probably to close a lot faster, perhaps. And you were looking for another creative outlet, right? And that's where baking came along for you.
Absolutely. And I ended at a high note because I wound up in a good way. So it's always better to do that than realize that you're not able to manage stuff and things start spiraling down then. So I think I closed that chapter at a high note and it was time to move on.
Yeah. It's always very difficult, that transition into motherhood anyway, or parenthood, fatherhood, just because you've had all this time and freedom, and then all of a sudden, no one can prepare you for it. Although you get told so many times that you're going to have no time. You're like, oh, I'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But it actually you then have to be very savvy with the time and hours that you have. And I'm guessing like very intricate pieces like jewelry, you need a lot of good lighting as well and time. And not only going off and negotiating and working with different tradespeople is like at home, you probably need a large block of time just to focus. And
Yeah.
you probably can't do that late at night
It's
because it's very intricate work.
and it's a very serious business because it's a lot of money involved in that. So
Mm.
you have to give it your all, otherwise you would somewhere fall short. So I think it was a good time for me to transition into baking. And I honestly, I didn't know I was going to make a career out of it.
No one ever does, really.
No,
At-
come-
But
Actu- you start doing this baking, right? But you're learning and you're doing your research and you're throwing 100% in where you can. But you didn't. How long did it take you before you started actually selling something? And
uh,
and this was in India when you were doing this,
yes,
correct?
in India. Just to fast forward a bit. So we moved to Canada just 2 years ago. Yeah. So we were in India before that. And so my son was born in 2012. And his first birthday is when I actually started dipping my hands into cakes and baked goods. So since people really enjoyed my cakes and I started making cupcakes and sending them out to friends and baking for people's birthdays, that's how it started as a business where people liked the taste of my cakes and they asked me if I could do their occasions. And that's how the celebration cake started in India. So that was probably a year into when I first started.
And what was your style, would you say, when you first started? Like, did you have a style forming, or where were
So,
you going with it at the
yeah.
beginning?
So from the get-go, I knew I didn't want to get into fondant cakes because I didn't like the taste of fondant. So I was pretty sure that I wanted to do other mediums that actually tasted good, where people didn't have to peel off and just throw away part of the cake. I wanted it to be consumed like 100%. So I knew from the beginning that this is what I wanted to do. So I focused on buttercream, ganache, and other edible mediums where I could really experiment. And there's just so much you can do. People used to, and I was one of the first people around there who wasn't doing fondant cakes, and everyone would ask me, "Why don't you do fondant?" I just stuck to what I believed in. So that's how you make your space where people know what you do, and you will attract those kind of clients in a way because they would know that this is what your forte is.
Yeah, this was 2015, right? When you were starting dabbling into cakes. Right.
So I started much before that, but around then is when I made my
Funky
company.
Batter
I
was
came up
born.
with a brand name and I started branding my cakes and products, and people started recognizing that this is a funky batter cake that is at a party or at a celebration.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was much before I joined Instagram or any kind of social media.
And trying to go back to around that 2015, I don't think there would have been a lot of buttercream cakes. Maybe it would have been American buttercream. The cupcakes were pretty popular, American
Yeah.
buttercream. But like from a cake perspective, I think you would have been quite forward thinking at that stage
Yeah.
if I go back that amount of time, and especially in India as well. So I'm sure you would have been standing out. And I find it very interesting that you were a jewelry designer. That's very like using your hands. It's quite intricate. It's very there's a start and an end, very similar to making cakes. So there's a whole process involved in it. And so it's at the end of it, you can stand back and admire your work as you would as a jewelry designer as well. And I'm just wondering at this time, was it an obsession for you because you had found this new creative outlet? Did you then decide to put everything into it to learn all about baking and consume everything, a bit like you were when you were younger, you were so intrigued by different cultures, or you were very intrigued by textiles and colors and
Yeah.
curiosity. Was the same obsession come into baking as well?
Absolutely. Over the years, I've seen when I have a problem in my head, I cannot sleep because, especially when I was developing my own buttercream and cake recipes, and there were days when I would wake up in the middle of the night and just try to solve certain problems. And so that obsession, I have that obsession, and I know my husband and my kids know that. And this will be stay clear when I'm in the zone and trying to create something. And yes, it's been a great outlet, especially during the pandemic. I think that's where I feel my creativity came to full bloom, because you needed some outlet from, you were holed up, uh, and there was no way that you weren't stepping out, and your kids were always around you. So the only outlet I had at that time was cakes. So I wasn't selling cakes at that time because of the pandemic, but I would do content cakes, because by then I was on Instagram. So I would use one cake and go over and over, keep creating different techniques and different styles. And that was like the peak of my creativity, I would think, that the years of the pandemic, those 2 years. Wow.
Those
Quite.
cakes. Ha- Half and I were just like in absolute awe of your.
Amazing.
They're so unique. They're out of the box. You use lots of different textures and mediums, and it's like edible art. And just looking at they're one-off pieces as well. I don't think I've seen something of your work that's been repeated, and it's probably very difficult for you to do that. I could see that you're probably in your element when you were doing this, rather than perhaps when you were doing your cake business and you're more at the mercy of like, other people's
The jewelry.
designs. Yeah, or also your cake business as you
Yes.
were building that up and what
Yes, the
people
business.
wanted, themed cakes, etc. I could see that it's almost that you built yourself. It's a years of training to get to that level as well from a cake designer perspective. And it's almost like you hit your peak of design and creativity. It's just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you're doing these cakes as a business. You're learning, you're growing, you're researching, you're waking up in the night, solving problems. When did the idea come to you to say, I need to take the brand in a bit of an extra direction and develop now some recipes, and going off the ethos of what you talk about, simplifying the process of making a cake for other people? How and why did that come about?
This entire thing happened during the pandemic, to be very honest, because you had all the time in the world. And I didn't have a cake business by then because all the celebrations had stopped. And so you had all this time, and I had so much pent up, maybe creativity or ideas oozing out. And I knew that there were gaps in the cake recipes that I was using, or the buttercream that I was using. I was in India back then, in the peak of the pandemic, before we moved here. So we moved here in the middle of the pandemic. And so it happened in India, where the weather, it's so warm and humid, and the buttercream would not hold up, and there were issues, right? And so I started using American buttercream, but it was too sweet. And the other kinds of buttercream were too tedious to make. So I wanted to make something that was very simple, tasted good. Like I said, a multifunctional recipe where it can be made vegan, egg-free, easy to make, comes together in minutes. So it started with my buttercream. I started experimenting. I went through so much butter and just trying to get the right recipe. And it took me almost a year or more. So between my move from India to Canada, there was a lot going on. It all started in India, but it finished off here when we moved. And the first year when you move to a new country, you don't know people. So I didn't know where my business, what direction it was taking. I didn't know anybody here. And to actually have a
Why
cake business, sorry.
why Canada then? How
Uh,
come of all places? I mean, it's just curious.
It's
Like,
a, it's a
is
great
it
country.
yeah,
it's a great country. So my husband
vastly
works
different to India?
it is. My husband works out of the US. So he works for a tech startup, and that's headquartered in the US, in Seattle. And I didn't want to move to the US, to be honest. So Canada was the closest choice, and it's a beautiful country to live in. So that's
That's
how we
amazing.
kind of ended up here.
And so your what I find quite interesting too when you talk about using American butter sweet and finding it too sweet. In my head, a lot of the Indian sweets that I have tried, and culturally speaking, are generally on the sweeter side, right? So of there's
I
so
am
many delicious, super sweet type delicacies to have there. So I find it quite interesting that did you always, maybe it was in your travels, maybe it was in your time in London, maybe you were influenced by different kinds of sweets that were less on the end of heavy sweetness and had a bit more of a delicacy or texture or balance of flavors, things like that. I'm just curious how you came to that finding.
I've never fit in to wherever I have been.
Black sheep.
So I I never liked overly sweet desserts myself, be it cake or buttercream or any kind of dessert. I just feel that it takes away from the flavors. I know Indian sweets tend to be very sweet, but then I'm not that fond of Indian sweets. And my mom used to make Indian sweets which were less sweet. So I guess I've always had that inkling towards lesser sweets. Even my cake recipes don't have a crazy amount of sugar, or have light to balance it out in terms of flavor. That's why it took me time to develop my recipes. And that even my
Wh-
cake recipes where like the sugar was less, and the same recipe can be made egg free and vegan with the same texture, the same level of moistness. So it took me really long to um, develop all those recipes, and I'm so glad that people are loving it, and it's amazing what social media can do. I'm sure you will be getting to that step of our conversation, but that's how this is.
Uh,
The brand
and
has really taken off. Yeah.
At the same time with your buttercream, you sell an amazing array of flavors of cakes as well. Like it's not just buttercream and all the various different flavors, of course, your own personalized buttercream recipe, but you have this wide range of recipes on this beautiful card that you can download. And I was talking to Haf beforehand. I said, you know what I like about what Hena's doing is that you're actually also tailoring it to pan size. And it's a real frustration when you start off as a baker. There's a few recipe books that do this, but it always is for like an 8-inch tin or a 7-inch tin. And you're like, when you're a new baker, you're like, oh, well, what does that mean? I've only got an 8-inch tin. So how then do I adapt that recipe? How do I mark it up? How do I mark it down? So what I love about what you're doing is that you're actually tailoring it very specific for different pan sizes, and you have this amazing array of recipes that you can just download and then you can just go, because like most recipe books they might do 1 to possibly 10 at the most different flavored cakes, but you don't get just a whole cake book of just recipes. It just is very rare. It'll be like added with biscuits and other things. So I love what you're doing. I think it's just hitting this lovely sweet spot as well in the industry.
I actually wanted people to have something where they don't have to go back to finding newer recipes. So there's one recipe which has, it is so versatile that it can be flavored in so many different ways. So you're mastering that one recipe. And just imagine how efficient you would become in your business, right? Because you're not going to 10 different kinds of recipes. So you have one master recipe and the possibility of so many different flavors. And it just doesn't stop to the flavors that I have in the book, because I give the process of how you can infuse different flavors. So there are different techniques of how you can infuse flavors in my buttercream. So there are 3 different ways. So once you have that tool, you can actually adapt it to so many different flavors. So I want to give people that tool. And I want to be able to reach people and home bakers, because I know what troubles I had as a home baker, right? When I started off, it was like looking all over to find the right recipes and which are stable. And there was just so many factors in there. So I just wanted to put all that together and to be able to reach. I've been able to reach 122 countries, which is absolutely insane. People in 122 countries are using my recipe, countries which I've never heard of. So this has all happened because of social media, which is sometimes it just blows my mind. And my little puny little baker was sitting in one part of the world.
Not just social media, but also a very talented cake maker behind the scenes as well.
You're solving an issue here for a lot of people, right? Let's not forget that you've got a product that solves a problem, and all those nights of waking up with your own issues and solving them, you're doing this for a lot of bakers, and that generally will lend to the success of this as well. Because if I'm reading here from these lovely research notes that Rachel puts together about the people that we interview, it took you, social media was not all of it, right? Because it took you almost 3 years to gain 3,000 followers on your Instagram, if I have this correct. So
yes, that's right.
And now obviously you're up into the 180 plus thousand, which is amazing. But the vast majority of your followers have come very recently. It's not that you started off with a bang like a lot of people do, and then things tend to slow down. Yours is the complete opposite of that. After Instagram changed its algorithms and made it harder for everyone, it didn't seem it. That's when you seem to flourish and bloom rather than go the other way, like many of the other bakers that we talk to.
I think it's very important to keep pivoting in the right direction as things change, right? So when I started in India, it was very different for me. I started with celebration cakes and baking for others. And I actually started teaching back in India. I used to teach live classes. And then I took it online during the pandemic. So it was live classes online. But I think when we moved here to Canada, again, that I had to pivot. And I had to change what I was doing because the landscape has changed now. With social media, yeah, it is difficult at this point to gain the following. But at the same time, I would say that because of Reels and because of some other features that Instagram has, you can actually do it quicker and reach more people, a wider audience, which was not possible in the early days. Yeah. Back in the day when I joined Instagram, it was not that easy to reach people beyond your community or beyond your few cake artists or people around you. It was very difficult to transcend the borders and go to different countries. But I feel the last couple of years, whatever the algorithm has changed, it's been to our favor in a way, because now I feel like I've got a little bit of the pulse of how it works. Having a product which is solving problems is the way that has actually led me to where I am. So it all started with me being very creative as an outlet and for my cakes, where different mediums, I was exploring different mediums, but the reach was not as much. I was posting content back in the day in the pandemic. I was doing cakes every day, different cakes, and I was posting it, but the growth wasn't as much. But now, I guess because of the algorithm changing, everyone has that opportunity. If you take it in the right way and in the right, you take it in your hands, where now I know that I have a strategy now where I talk about my product on certain days of the week. I share hacks and tips with my following on certain days of the week. And so it's like a combination of all that, where you have a strategy and you know that it will help to build your followers, to be able to reach people, new people every time. So Reels has that feature, right, where you reach new people with every post that you're posting. So there are different types of content. Again, my researcher brain does that. So I research the hell out of everything. What is working? What would work for my followers? What would work to reach new followers? So that's how I've pivoted in this direction. And that's how I think the growth has happened in the last, I would say, 2 years.
Your Instagram photos and reels now are far less focused on those out of this world kind of style cakes and far more on little hacks or tips or just like buttercream swirling. It that is so interesting in itself, because you think about those cakes that you were making during the pandemic. They were probably hours, if not days, multi days of work put together. And now you're probably rehashing, using content over again, but using different wording on top of it and different.
That's
There's
the
a
beauty of it.
yeah. It's not like you're actually heavily creating a lot of content, as in your cakes, which are probably taking you hours. But what I was going to say is that during the pandemic and learning all those skills mean that then you can translate that into easy hacks for other people to learn. Like, it might have taken you a long time to learn different things, edible art forms. But now you can go, okay, how can I take that into a bite size and put that onto my Instagram in a very small nugget, rather than being this out of this world cake that people go, I've got no idea how she does that.
It's interesting, but the thought process, because I have like my whole year planned. And
That's amazing.
that has something to do with my husband, because he's a strategy and planning guy. So he pushes me. I'm the creative person. I don't think numbers. I don't think financial stuff, and no strategy for me. But he pushes me to have a strategy and a plan. And so I have my whole year planned, where, to be very honest, I want to take people through the journey of mastering their recipes. And I've actually just launched my new course, which is Cake Canvas, which is building that canvas to have that canvas ready to create different techniques onto that. I'm taking it one step at a time. I want people to master the recipes, then move on to your cake decorating. And I have a lot of other things planned for the year, where I want to take them step by step, from basic cakes to maybe a luxury line of cakes, to techniques where I would love to teach techniques that I've been exploring in the past, sculpted buttercream. And there are so many other things, like the rough stone technique on fondant. I actually did that in buttercream. This was 3 years ago. So I would love to share that as part of one of my courses. So I want to take it one step at a time, where people can actually follow that journey with me, and build that community where people, home bakers, can actually become pros. And they, from starting out, because I have so many people who are starting out as bakers. They've probably just started making cakes. And so there are so many issues that they need to solve to get to that professional level. So I want to take them with me on that journey. And so that's my plan for the future. And let's see how that works. I have my fingers crossed. In the last 2 years, we moved into a new country. The last 6 months, you talked about reposting and repurposing my content, which I've been doing for the last 6 months, because I've I've been working on other projects. We are moving into a new home. So, you know how personal life kind of gets in the way of stuff?
Isn't that great in some ways that you don't have to create so much content? That'd be great for a lot of bakers who are listening right now, or content creators, that actually it's not like constantly creating content. It's actually how do you use that content? I think that's
Absolutely.
what's inspiring, Hen. But you have also had the years of experience, which you can't. I don't think you can bypass that in any industry. Yeah, and it gives you a lot of credibility, and especially with your audience and seeking other people as you start to grow. But I think that's we all go through different seasons of our lives and things are going on, and behind the scenes of this beautifully curated Instagram page, you're probably like, I just need to keep these wheels moving,
Yeah.
and keep people interested while I do this whole big personal life change.
No, but you have to adapt. I think that's the name of the game, right? You have to keep pivoting and keep adapting to your circumstances. Things happen. It's been crazy for me the last 6 months. We are renovating a home. We are moving into a new home this month. I haven't had time to create that much yet. I've just come up with my new course today because I have dedicated that time to that. So creating content and all this is it's so difficult. So just repivoting and using that old content, but reaching new audience every time. Every time I post my reels, it's reaching new audience. Like I'm surprised, and that's why I always share these tips with my followers. I tell them that don't be afraid, especially if a reel has performed well, don't be afraid to repost it because there is something in the algorithm which is liking that content of yours. Just go ahead and repost it. Your followers are probably not seeing your content as much, right? Because of the algorithm. It's when you're following so many people. So when you're browsing, you probably don't see half the content of people you're following, right? Unless you actually have that notification. So you're reaching new people every time. If you want to grow on Instagram, you have to adapt to what Instagram wants as well. So I know I keep posting my buttercream videos and swirling the buttercream, but it's amazing how much people love that.
Oh, I
You
still love
know,
it.
it's
do, do you miss not selling the cakes and the cupcakes and having that aspect of the business?
honestly, I don't, because with selling cakes, like Rachel mentioned as well, you're very limited because you have a brief from a client. They want certain things in a certain way. Where your creativity, unless, you define your style and have complete creative freedom where your client tells you that it's up to you, you make whatever you want. If you're in that position, that is amazing, right? But not everybody has that luxury because when you have a client, they give you a brief and you have to stick to that brief. So somewhere your own creativity kind of gets limited. So doing content and what I'm doing right now, I think I'm extremely happy because I have that flexibility where, you know, I do things the way I want to do. So whatever I have planned in the future, the cakes that I want to create or the techniques that I want to share in the future, it's going to be from my brain and how I want to see it. So it's going to be like my creativity where I'm not getting influenced by what I have to do for a client. So I don't think I miss that. And, hustling to get orders, um, it's tough. I feel it for people who are doing it, who have regular jobs where, they're working 9 to 5 and then baking on the weekends. I feel that pain because it's not easy. And in this environment where everything is expensive, the inflation, ingredients are going over the roof, prices of ingredients are going over the roof. It's a tough time to be doing cakes as a business as well.
Do you miss the creativity of actual baking though? I find myself, even if I've been sat at the computer or if I've been doing lots of different types of work, I get really itchy and antsy and I'm like, half I need to go bake.
Yes,
I
always.
it's like a release for me that I don't think I can actually be without it right now. It's even if I was I don't know, there's something that flows through my brain when it might not actually be the baking process, it might actually be the decorating process that
Decorating. Yeah.
for me that is quite interesting. But I do go, oh, I just need to go bake. I like it. Like, there's too much when I've been sat at the looking at my laptop all day and like or
I
answering,
know.
thinking
I
about
know.
queries, etc. It is a release, and I'm interested for you as well, being your background in jewelry as well and creating and using your hands. And it's a very different thing when you're starting to edit and strategize and you're doing a lot of content work. It is not as hand creative, maybe the touch related. Do you then have to factor in something like baking or
So I,
cooking
I
or
I have 2 content cakes lying in my fridge all the time.
okay?
So I'm always doing that. And then you have your kids' birthdays, which they have
Yeah.
specific client demands where they want you to work on. And then I like to be creative in their cakes as well. I convince them away from those typical like they love Pokemon or Harry Potter, and
Oh
then I want
yeah,
to
we know
get
that.
creative in their cakes as well. So yes, there are outlets where but in the whole grind of daily life and what all is going on in our personal lives, just to be able to get that content out on a daily basis and working on my courses, and that kind of consumes me. And so for my outlet, I'd rather just listen to music or just go for a
No,
walk.
it's interesting, right? It's everyone's so different. And I guess it just depends on what's going on, but at your time, and also if you've got limited hours, just to get that content out and make sure you keep engaging with your audience. And this is your business as well. This is where you build your income from. So you have to then be able to, well, I've only got this amount of hours. And do you also see a correlation between posting on social media and then someone going to your website and purchasing
A-
one of your buttercream recipes
Absolutely.
or cake recipes?
So many times, like I don't like to be pushy in my sales, but if I post about my buttercream, that day the sales are insane. So you just have to do what you have to do, right? I, like I try not to pop into people's emails. I have a very good email list, but personally, I myself don't like getting too many emails. So I refrain from that. So I feel like my social media handle is my way of expression and my way of doing whatever I want to do because that's my space. So I post about my products or about what I'm doing or the problems I'm solving. Everything is through my social media so that people have that choice. If they want to follow me, if they like my work, if they want to continue seeing what I'm doing, they have the choice to follow me or unfollow me if they find it too overwhelming. So it's their choice, but it's my handle, so I can guide it in the way that I want to. So I guess it's all about just maximizing what you have in your current circumstances, and social media has a large part to play in how my brand is developed and how people recognize my brand or what I'm doing. So I'm very happy that this is part of my life because that's how my business has grown, but it has its own share of negatives as well. Social media is not all positive.
No, I was going to say,
Yeah.
what are some of the challenges that you run to in here with this? Because There is obviously a lot of negativity out there on social media. Are you affected by it, or did you learn to build some thick skin and brush it off? How have you dealt with it in the past?
I think it's when your reel goes viral or some content goes viral. Beyond a certain number of days, that's when the trolls come out and they start commenting. And so there was few posts that went into millions where people would just say, "What an ugly cake," or "What are you even?" Really random comments. And I understand everybody has their own way of expression, but then the negativity comes in. It really used to bother me because I'm a kind of person who loves to stay away from controversies and anything negative. So it did bother me initially, and but I took it as upon myself to post more content. So I used those negative comments to post another reel with the negative comments. That's what, make the most of it, right?
Yeah. Do you get, because your whole business is around selling your recipes, how do you protect that? So how do you stop other people reselling them, or once they've bought your recipes and sharing it with their audience so that they then don't have to go and purchase your recipes? Like, is it a challenge that you think about quite a lot?
Yes. So initially, it used to bother me a lot because I would see people copying my content, the way I'm selling my recipe. I use my frequently asked questions and I put them as a reel, and then that reel was copied by people all over the world. And I don't know, because a lot of people are selling their own recipes. So there's no way for me to find out if it's their own recipe or is it a version of mine. I don't know. And honestly, initially, it would bother me a lot. So I would go after them. But now I feel it's not worth my time because I'd rather focus on developing new stuff. So I came up with a buttercream, then I came up with my flavors, then I came up with my cakes. Now I have so many more things planned that I'd rather combat that with coming up with something new and more creative rather than delving on who's doing what. So I stay clear from what's going on social media, what's going on with other people. Honestly, I've learned to just step away from that and concentrate on what I do best. And I just want to put all my time and effort in that rather than on contacting people, asking them why they're doing this, because they always have some sort of excuse, or they will always kind of say something which would defend them rather than listen to what I have to say. So I don't think it's worth my time. So I've let that both sail. And
Yeah.
I'm just concentrating on my work and how I can do more and help more people out and solve more problems for the industry.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's the right approach. If you look at your brand as it's growing now, you think about other ways that you want to outreach beyond social media. Have you been presented with other opportunities for that in terms of, let's say, cake shows, or is it collaborations with other people? Have you had those opportunities come around yet, or is that something that you're working on as part of your annual plan to branch the brand out even more?
I do not go out and look for collaborations because I've got so much going on right now that I have done few collaborations in the past. Like when I was in India, I designed my line of stencils with some company. I didn't monetize it. I was probably not at that stage at that time. I just wanted to do it for the love of creativity. And I had so many ideas that I just wanted to do that. So I had a line of stencils. Then I collaborated with a company in India for colors and edible colors. So all that was what happened then. And now I would love to collaborate with brands which speak to what I'm doing, which are solving problems, because I have a need for my own recipes. Like I have a need for certain say, colors or for certain products for my recipes, which I know it could be like a collaboration with a brand where both sides actually gain from it, right? Because I have so many people who are buying my recipe and I know the problems they are facing with certain, say, brand of colors or type of colors or say stencils for, just take an example of anything like stencils or any kind of product to do with cakes. But I want the right collaborations. Honestly, I don't want to just go out for collaborations and for paid partnerships or anything because you have limited time. What I'm doing with my product would be bigger than what I would do probably in terms of partnerships. But if it's solving a problem for my audience, for my community, for people who are buying my recipes, I would be more than glad to do that. So I'm very open-minded and I have certain things in mind, which maybe I work in the coming year. But my focus is not collaborations yet because I have just too many things going on. There's limited time.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. You got enough going on right now with everything else that seems to be happening. But listen, I think it's fascinating to get the picture and understand what you've been going through. And, we really appreciate you sharing that journey with us. We like to wrap up our conversations with a bit of a quickfire round. But I'm already looking at my first question thinking, well, there's no point asking it because normally we tend to ask people if they have a preference between
I think we can still ask it.
American buttercream, Swiss meringue buttercream, or ganache. So if we were to take your funky batter out of the equation, when you first started, what was your preference?
So ganache, definitely. And American buttercream, but with lesser sugar. I've always used an American buttercream recipe, but I always reduced the sugar in it because it just didn't work with me.
All right. One aspect of baking you won't compromise on.
The flavor. And the quality of ingredients and the flavor. I think that trumps everything. If your cake doesn't taste good, nothing else matters. You can have the best.
Defeats the purpose.
Why did you make it? True.
Yeah.
All right. How about a baking book from your bookshelf you might like to recommend?
So honestly, I am not a book person. I don't think I own too many recipe books or baking books. I'm more of an internet person. When I started also, it was researching on the internet and finding different things. So I'll pass that.
No, that's okay. You're not the only one. We've heard that a few times, for sure.
And who would you want to make your next birthday cake?
Who would I want should make my next birthday cake?
Yeah.
Yeah, is there someone that inspires you? Whether you
I
see
think
them online or...
Marina Machado.
Yeah.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
Marina Machado. Okay. You may know her, Rachel.
Yeah.
I'm going to check that one out. Fantastic. That's really cool. Thank you for that.
And I just love her creativity and I just love how she goes with the flow. I think that's why I would pick her for sure.
Well, if she's listening, you never know. You may get a DM.
She's in Australia, so I doubt.
Oh, don't let that stop you. Distance is nothing. We've got planes. We can send things. But listen, holidays. That's right. And thank you so much for that. This was really enjoyable. Great to get the story, and we just really appreciate you taking the time to sit and chat with us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was so wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.